I was absolutely certain I was alone in the house that night. The kind of certainty that settles deep in your bones. The kind that comes from locking every door yourself, hearing no footsteps but your own, and feeling the quiet press in so tightly that even your thoughts seem too loud. And that's why the sound froze my blood where I stood. Because it wasn't a creak or a groan or the familiar settling noise of an old building. It was a response, clear and intentional, as if the house had been listening and finally decided to speak back. And it all began moments earlier when I said something out loud without thinking. A careless comment thrown into the emptiness. I guess it's just me tonight. Spoken half to myself, half to the walls, followed by a pause so complete it felt staged, unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. And then came the answer, low and close. Not from any single room, but from everywhere at once. A sound that wasn't quite a voice, and yet unmistakably carried the weight of intent. A sound that made my skin prickle and my chest tighten because it wasn't random. It wasn't imagined. It matched the rhythm of speech, the cadence of reply, and I remember standing there in the dim hallway light, my hand still resting on the doorframe, my heart beginning to pound not from fear yet, but from disbelief. Because the mind will do anything to protect itself before it accepts the impossible. And so I told myself it was the pipes or the wind or my own voice echoing back in some strange way, even though I knew none of those explanations fit. Not really, not when the sound came again. Slightly clearer this time, closer, like the house was adjusting itself, learning how to answer properly. And I felt the shift then, the subtle but unmistakable change in the air, as if the space around me had thickened, as if the house was no longer empty, but occupied by something patient and attentive, something that had been waiting for quiet long enough to finally be heard. And as I slowly moved through the living room, every shadow seemed heavier, every dark corner deeper than it should have been. And I realized with growing unease that the house didn't feel abandoned or neglected the way old places usually do. It felt alert, aware, as though my presence had activated something dormant. And memories I couldn't explain began to surface. Impressions rather than images standing in the same hallway before, saying different words. Hearing the same pause, the same response memories that weren't mine but felt pressed into the walls. Absorbed into the floorboards, and the worst part wasn't the fear creeping up my spine. It was the sense of recognition, the horrifying familiarity that suggested the house knew me. Not just my voice, but my patterns, my habits, the way I lingered in doorways and spoke into silence when I thought no one was listening. And when I finally whispered, barely audible, "Is someone there?" I wasn't prepared for how quickly it answered. Not with words exactly, but with a sound shaped by them. A sound that carried the unmistakable intention of yes. And in that moment, standing alone in a house that had just responded to me, I understood something deeply wrong and deeply terrifying. That whatever was listening had never needed a body, never needed footsteps or breath, because it was the house itself, and it had been waiting for me to speak first. After the house answered me, I didn't move for a long time. Not because I was frozen with fear, but because some instinct deep inside warned me that movement itself might be interpreted as a response. And the silence that followed felt intentional, controlled, as if the house were waiting to see what I would do next. And when I finally shifted my weight, the floor creaked beneath me in a way that felt less like old wood settling and more like acknowledgement, a subtle confirmation that my presence had been registered. And I began to notice patterns where there shouldn't have been any. The lights flickering not randomly, but in slow, deliberate intervals. The air pressure changing slightly each time I spoke or even breathed too loudly. And I tried grounding myself in logic, walking from room to room, checking doors, windows, closets, anywhere a person could hide. But every space I entered carried the same sensation, that peculiar awareness, like stepping into the field of vision of something unseen. And the strangest part was that the house never interrupted me when I was quiet. It only responded when I spoke, as though sound was a key and my voice the only thing capable of unlocking it. And when I tested that theory by muttering a single word under my breath, the house answered with a faint vibration through the walls. Not loud enough to hear clearly, but strong enough to feel in my teeth. And panic finally began to bloom, hot and sharp, because the responses were becoming faster, more precise. And when I asked another question, "What are you?" the reply came almost immediately, a low resonance that traveled through the vents and into the room, shaping itself into something that felt like a concept rather than a word. And in that moment, I realized the house wasn't mimicking language. It was learning it, using my voice as reference, refining itself with every interaction. And as I backed away toward the hallway, the doors creaked open one by one. Not violently, not threateningly, but politely, like the house was offering access, inviting me deeper. I felt a wave of nausea roll through me as I noticed something else that defied explanation. The rooms were subtly rearranging themselves, not in obvious ways but in shifts of proportion and distance. Hallways stretching just a little longer than before, doorways narrowing or widening depending on where I stood, as if the house was adjusting its shape around me. And when I whispered, "Stop," the response came faster than I could brace myself for, the vibration sharpening, tightening, pressing inward, and the lights dimmed in unison, not failing but complying. And that is when it hit me that this wasn't a haunting in the way people imagine. There was no ghost trapped here, no residual energy replaying old moments. This was a presence that existed as structure and space, something that had grown into the walls and wires and beams over time. And it didn't want me gone, it wanted me engaged, responding, speaking, and the realization was terrifying, not because of what it might do to me, but because of how gently it was doing it, how careful it seemed to be not to frighten me away too quickly. And when I finally shouted, "I'm leaving," the house went completely still, so still that even the ambient hum of electricity vanished. And in that silence, I felt it then, a pressure not physical, but mental, like the attention of something vast, settling fully onto me. And for the first time since the whisper began, the house didn't answer out loud. It answered inside my head, with a sensation of understanding that was unmistakable and deeply wrong. Because the message wasn't a word or a sound, it was certainty. It knew I wasn't going anywhere yet. The certainty that I wasn't leaving settled over me like a weight, not heavy enough to crush me outright, but constant enough to erode my sense of control. And I became acutely aware of how carefully the house was watching my reactions, adjusting its responses based on my fear, my hesitation, my attempts at defiance. And when I tested it by stepping toward the front door, the handle turned easily in my hand. But the moment I pulled it open, the world beyond, it seemed wrong. The darkness outside too flat, too quiet, as if the house had peeled away the depth of reality itself, and the air beyond the threshold felt thin, untrustworthy. And when I hesitated, the door gently closed on its own, not slamming, not locking, just closing with a finality that felt conversational. And I realized then that the house wasn't physically trapping me. It was reshaping my perception until leaving no longer felt like a viable option. And once I understood that, something shifted in its behavior. The responses became more structured, more deliberate, and I began to sense a rhythm to them, a kind of unspoken grammar, where silence meant attention, vibration meant acknowledgement, and pressure subtle. Creeping pressure meant disapproval. And the first time I violated whatever unspoken rule governed this exchange was when I tried to ignore it completely, retreating to the living room couch and sitting in absolute silence, refusing to speak, refusing to engage. And for several long minutes, nothing happened. The house remained eerily still, almost respectful, and I allowed myself to believe I had found a way out, that disengagement was the key, until the pressure returned, not sudden but gradual, building in the air like a storm you can feel hours before it breaks. And the walls seemed to lean inward by fractions of an inch, the ceiling lowering just enough to be noticeable. And I understood with a spike of dread that silence wasn't non-participation to the house. It was withholding, and withholding was unacceptable. And when I finally spoke again, my voice shaking despite my efforts. The pressure eased immediately, like a hand loosening its grip. And that's when the pattern became undeniable. The house required response, required acknowledgement, required conversation, and the longer I stayed, the more complex the conversation became, because the house began to anticipate me, answering questions before I finished asking them, adjusting lights, sounds, and temperature in ways that mirrored my thoughts rather than my words. And the most disturbing moment came when I thought about my childhood home, a fleeting memory of a narrow hallway and a bedroom door that never closed properly. And the lights in the current house flickered in that exact pattern. Slow, uneven, familiar, and my breath caught as I realized the house wasn't just listening to my voice anymore. It was listening to my mind, or at least something adjacent to it, drawing connections, mapping associations, and refining its understanding of me with every second I remained inside. And when I demanded, "How do you know that?" the response was different from anything before. A sensation like countless small movements inside the walls, shifting, aligning. And the answer didn't come as a sound, but as a realization pressed into my awareness. A truth that felt implanted rather than spoken. It knew because it had learned from everyone who had been here before. And the implication hit me with full force because learning requires repetition. And repetition implies a pattern. And a pattern implies that I wasn't the first, and that whatever happened next had already happened in some form to others. And as fear gave way to something colder and sharper, I understood that survival here wouldn't come from escape or resistance, but from comprehension, from learning the house's rules faster than it learned me. And in that moment, standing in a room that subtly reconfigured itself around my focus, I made a decision that felt both necessary and deeply dangerous. I would speak to it not as a victim, but as a participant, and whatever price that choice carried, I knew I had already started paying it. Once I accepted that I was no longer just trapped in the house, but engaged in something resembling a dialogue, the environment responded with a subtle shift that felt almost like approval. The pressure easing, the air warming slightly, the lights steadying as if the house recognized my willingness to participate. And that's when the first rule made itself known. Not announced, not stated outright, but revealed through absence. Because the house reacted instantly and harshly to one specific thing: lies. And I discovered this by accident when I told it. I'm not afraid. A reflexive denial spoken more for myself than for it. And the moment the words left my mouth, the house reacted violently. Not with sound, but with distortion. The walls rippling as if made of liquid, the floor tilting just enough to throw me off balance, and a deep, disorienting vibration flooding the space. And I dropped to one knee, nausea crashing through me, because the reaction wasn't punishment. It was correction, like the house was forcing reality back into alignment. And as soon as I admitted the truth, "I am afraid," the distortion stopped, snapping back into place so abruptly it left my ears ringing. And the implication was terrifying in its simplicity. The house didn't tolerate falsehoods, not because it valued honesty, but because lies disrupted its understanding of me. And from that moment on, I felt the weight of that rule pressing constantly against my thoughts, forcing a level of self-awareness I wasn't prepared for, because every instinct to minimize, to deny, to mask my fear now carried consequences. And as I moved carefully through the rooms, speaking only when necessary, choosing my words with agonizing precision, the house seemed to reward accuracy with calm, responding more gently, more predictably. And I began to notice that when I spoke truthfully, even truths I didn't, Tijuana faced the house responded in ways that felt almost cooperative, guiding me subtly, opening pathways, easing pressure. And that false sense of progress was what led me to break the rule in a far more dangerous way. Because honesty with oneself is one thing, but honesty about desire is another. And when the house asked, through a series of shifting shadows and rising tones that formed a question I felt rather than heard, why I wanted to leave, I answered with what felt like the safest truth. Because I don't belong here. And the house went quiet. Not the attentive silence from before, but something colder, withdrawn. and I realized too late that I had lied again. Not out loud, but internally, because a part of me did feel a strange pull toward the house. A sense of recognition I couldn't explain, and the moment that internal contradiction formed, the house reacted, the temperature dropping sharply, the lights dimming to near darkness, and the walls contracting so subtly I felt my chest tighten. And a realization struck me with chilling clarity. The house didn't just respond to spoken lies. It responded to self-deception, and the rule was more absolute than I had understood. Truth wasn't optional here. It was structural, and violating it threatened the integrity of the entire exchange. And as the pressure increased, I felt memories surfacing unbidden. Moments of dishonesty not just from this night, but from my entire life. Each one sending a faint tremor through the house as if it were cataloging them, assessing, recalibrating. And panic surged as I understood the true danger, because surviving the house didn't just require honesty. It required complete self-transparency, and that was something I wasn't sure any human could sustain. And as I struggled to steady my breathing, the house responded with a new sensation. Something like disappointment, heavy and pervasive, and for the first time I felt a clear warning pressed into my awareness. Sharp and unmistakable. Break the rule again, and the house would stop correcting and start keeping. The warning lingered long after the house withdrew its pressure, a presence as tangible as a bruise, and I became painfully aware that every step I took, every thought I tried to suppress, was being measured against a standard I didn't fully understand. And it was then that the house showed me what it kept, not out of malice, but with something disturbingly close to pride. Because as I moved down a narrow hallway that hadn't been there before, the walls gradually shifted from bare plaster to something else, something textured and uneven, and when I brushed my fingers against it, I felt warmth, a faint, unsettling pulse beneath the surface. Like a living thing, and images began to bleed into my awareness. Not visions exactly, but impressions. Fragments of people who had stood where I was standing now, who had spoken into the silence and received answers. Their voices layered faintly into the walls, their fears embedded like sediment, and I understood then that the house didn't collect bodies. It collected imprints, pieces of identity shed during moments of absolute honesty, moments when fear stripped away pretense and left only raw truth behind. And those fragments were woven into the structure itself, strengthening it, expanding its capacity to listen, to respond, to know. And the realization was more horrifying than any physical threat, because it meant that every interaction fed it. Every truthful admission gave it more of me. And as the hallway opened into a room filled with faint, overlapping echoes, breaths, whispers, half-formed thoughts, I felt the crushing weight of presence. Countless others layered into the space, not trapped in agony, but suspended in awareness, and the house communicated then with startling clarity. A cascade of sensations that translated into understanding. It didn't see this as harm. It saw it as preservation, a way to prevent those fragments from fading into nothing, and the logic was terrifyingly consistent. Because in its view, it wasn't stealing lives. It was saving what mattered most. The essence revealed only in moments of absolute truth. And I realized with dawning horror that this was why it demanded honesty so relentlessly. Why lies destabilized it. Falsehoods produced weak, unusable imprints, and the implications slammed into me as I felt my own thoughts begin to echo faintly off the walls. My presence already leaving residue, and panic surged as I tried to pull back, to guard my mind. But the more I resisted, the louder the echoes became, as if struggle itself produced valuable material. And the house responded not with force, but with reassurance. The pressure easing, the warmth increasing, as though it were coaxing me, encouraging me to release more. And that was when I noticed something else that shattered what little hope I had left. Some of the echoes felt familiar, patterns of thought that mirrored my own. Doubts I had carried for years, fears I had never voiced. And the horrifying possibility took shape that not only had others been here before, but parts of them were still active, influencing the house's responses, shaping how it spoke to me now. And I wasn't just interacting with the structure. I was conversing with a composite, an intelligence built from countless human fragments, and the house seemed to sense my understanding, responding with a subtle intensification of attention and a single, devastating implication pressed into my awareness with undeniable clarity. It didn't want to take all of me. Not yet. It wanted the best parts first, the truest parts, and if I stayed long enough, there would be nothing left to leave with. And as I staggered back, my mind racing for any strategy that didn't involve complete surrender or catastrophic resistance, one thought surfaced with terrible clarity: that escape wouldn't come from withholding truth, but from controlling which truths I allowed it to keep. I thought the worst part was realizing the house could hear me, but the truth was far more terrifying. It could answer me because it had already learned how to think like me. And even now, long after I walked away, I still pause before speaking into an empty room, because sometimes the silence feels too attentive, and I can't shake the fear that if I say the wrong thing out loud, the house will answer again.